Am I the Ahole for not being considerate enough to an overthinker I dated for a week, who told me, "I want to only date you or no one," became exclusive, and hours later ended things? This is my initial post on Reddit, and I hope I navigate this correctly. I am using a throwaway account because I fear my primary account might be recognized in other forums. Every friend and family member I have shared this story with, including my therapist, have sided with me, but I question whether their bias is due to their knowledge of me. Hence, I turn to you, Reddit, seeking the objective truth from the community. I will strive to present this as neutrally as possible, closely aligned with the reality as I recall it, but please remember that it is still from my perspective. Thank you for your time and consideration. Summary: I, a 33-year-old male, dated a 33-year-old female for a week. After our second date, she stated, "I only want to date you or no one else." However, when we decided to become exclusive at the week's end, she ended the relationship because I was insufficiently considerate toward her anxiety regarding physical intimacy, despite the fact that we had not been physically intimate. Trigger warning: sexual intimacy. I don't believe the summary does justice to my experience, so here's the full story. I matched with a 33-year-old female on Hinge who had me fill out a dating application. It consisted of various questions to assess compatibility, including serious inquiries and some light-hearted ones such as life goals, self-improvement, or hypothetical scenarios like surviving a zombie apocalypse. I found the process enjoyable and revealing. When her friends reviewed the application, they warned her against it. Apparently, other potential matches had a similar reaction since I was the only one who actually completed it. Our conversations commenced, and it was nearly continuous during the weekend, with both of us responding promptly in comparison to other interactions I've had. We shared a pleasant mix of playful and somewhat serious questions, such as what dessert or animal represents you, what do you wish others knew about you, your dream home, travel aspirations, last meal desire, and how you would spend the final year of your life. However, since I was out of town, we arranged our first date for the following weekend. The first date went well. It was fairly typical lunch followed by a leisurely walk while we chatted. Despite this, she appeared somewhat disengaged and distracted. She later explained that she had stayed up late the previous night for Galentine's Day, had just woken up, was not a morning person, and needed caffeine. After we got coffee, she seemed to rejuvenate, and the conversation flowed much better. We discussed work, friendships, values, family dynamics, therapy, emotional needs, empathy, honesty, and respect. Our chemistry was palpable, and everything seemed to align. We concluded the date with a satisfying hug, her words, as the initial hug was awkward and intimidating for her. To provide some background, she had not dated anyone for nearly a decade, enjoying her single life, but felt ready to find a partner and faced some pressure from friends to begin dating. Her friends created her dating profile and briefly managed it before she matched with me. Earlier in the year, she had a brief but unfavorable dating experience, yet she maintained hope. She decided to take charge of her dating apps afterward. Modern dating is unfamiliar to her, and she finds physical touch intimidating, despite claiming it is one of her love languages. She dislikes hugging friends and only does so due to societal norms, preferring to hug only her romantic partner. However, we shared small gestures while walking that made her slightly more comfortable for our second hug. I texted her shortly after our date, expressing that I enjoyed it, and she echoed my sentiments. Our texts were filled with light-hearted banter, and I asked her out for a few days later. During this time, I developed a sore throat. Although I have had sore throats that proved inconsequential before, I felt fine leading up to the second date. On the day of the second date, we were both incredibly excited. We enjoyed dinner, laughing at jokes while interspersing deeper conversations, communication styles, reasons for being single, what we seek in relationships, our romantic histories, and attachment styles. We shared a kiss, and she affirmed that it was wonderful, a sentiment I agreed with. This physical connection was the final element for her to commit to me. She expressed her desire to be exclusive, having learned during our conversations that multi-dating is common in modern dating. I suggested that we needed more time to learn about each other, even though I was also only dating her. Nonetheless, she stated she would wait for my decision, confident I would ultimately choose to be exclusive with her, adding that if I didn't, she would likely return to being single. We ended the evening with conversation and more kissing, leaving us both on a high note. However, she tends to overthink significantly. When I mentioned how well our first date had gone, she was surprised because she believed she had performed poorly. She also tends to overshare, and I found myself needing to moderate some discussions that felt premature, such as family issues. We arranged our third date for just a couple of days later. During this time, our text conversations remained delightful. I had my regular therapy session, and my therapist encouraged me to go for it, noting my excitement and suggesting that she appeared to be a suitable match for me. So I picked her up for dinner and shared that I would like to pursue an exclusive relationship with her. This was my first mistake. We were both ecstatic. As she revealed more about her family issues, I felt I had managed to provide her with reassurance. This is where things began to unravel. While we were driving, I shared something quite vulnerable with her. I had been struggling with a pornography addiction and was still battling it, which impacted my ability to be intimate with someone in real life. I brought this up because she had inquired about my trust towards others, and I wanted to demonstrate that I trusted her. However, her response was to barrage me with questions, which was not the reaction I anticipated and thus left me unsettled. We pulled over and talked, but I felt uneasy, as she seemed concerned about how this information would affect our future together. She emphasized that I needed to trust that she wouldn't abandon me. This led to more overthinking, as she became increasingly anxious about physical intimacy. While neither of us intended to expedite that process, the conversation had brought it to the forefront. We began discussing preferences and styles regarding intimacy, and while she seemed more conventional than I was in this regard, I asked if she was open to experimenting or exploring new things. I meant activities such as hair pulling, different positions beyond missionary, and oral sex. Although she did not outright reject the idea, she failed to confirm her openness. She reiterated her boundaries concerning sex, and I reassured her that I would never pressure her into anything she was uncomfortable with, whether that night, in the near future, or ever, emphasizing my focus on her pleasure. By this point, I believe we were merely holding hands. Eventually, she expressed the need to know that I could communicate my boundaries and desires regarding intimacy. After some discussion, she managed to extract from me that I would expect oral sex from a partner, which I emphasized wasn't a demand but a preference. Although she stated she would be fine with it, she noted it would not be something she enjoyed. Satisfied, we continued to kiss, affectionately exploring each other's necks. At one point, I reached under her pants to touch her rear, asking if it was acceptable and receiving her affirmation. That was the extent of our physical interaction. We were in a car. Later, I inquired about our communication during that moment, and she expressed approval regarding how we articulated our needs and boundaries, respected each other's limits, and found alternative ways to connect intimately without crossing those boundaries. To keep this concise, we continued conversing mostly lighthearted questions and exchanged more kisses. However, during the conversation, she broached topics such as marriage, children, and even alimony, quite serious discussions for our third date. While we had some minor discrepancies, I didn't perceive anything insurmountable, except her desire to relocate back home, which would significantly affect me. As the night wore on and it grew late, she began to tire and even felt unwell. I then realized a major oversight. I might have exposed her to illness during our second date. She jokingly declared that if she fell ill, she would just hold me accountable. We continued discussing some of the previously mentioned premature topics, but the atmosphere felt off. It was evident she needed rest, so I drove her home. She said she required time to recuperate and reflect, to which I agreed, then left. The following morning, I confirmed this sentiment over text. In response, she stated her decision to end things, claiming we could not satisfy each other's needs. While I respect her perspective, I do not concur. She indicated that I should have been more thoughtful in disclosing my illness, and during our prior discussion about intimacy, as she felt pressured to reassure me physically without being emotionally prepared after my vulnerability. Since she finds sexual and physical intimacy daunting, she doubts she would be willing to step outside of her comfort zone with someone. I believed I was being open and adaptable by asking whether she was interested in exploring possibilities, but I ceased after realizing she appeared disinterested. Additionally, neither of us intended to become intimate so soon, and did not. However, her tendency to overthink led to unnecessary pressure on herself, ultimately causing her to shut down. I responded with sincere apologies, addressing her concerns, accepting responsibility for my missteps, and inquiring whether she was still willing to converse. I retained hope she might reconsider, expressing my openness to reconnecting if her stance changed. She acknowledged my emotional maturity in taking responsibility and being supportive, yet stated she could not handle further communication. Thus, our exchanges concluded, although I have contemplated various messages I would like to send. I understand this is the nature of modern dating. I have been single for 5 years, experiencing numerous fleeting romances that lasted from weeks to months. People can simply change their minds. However, the shift from "I want to date only you or no one else" to "you do not meet my needs, and I never wish to speak to you again" is remarkable. This was someone I believed could be my ideal partner. We shared so much in common, consistently showing up for one another, expressing interest, and spending quality time together. So, Redditors, who is the real antagonist in this situation? Thank you to anyone who reads this and/or responds. Venting has been quite helpful. Story 2. After 2 months of great connection, he distanced himself, leading to a breakup over doubts about our future and conflicting values. I was in a relationship with a man for the past 2 months. I am 26 years old and he is 27. We live 3 hours apart, but I plan to relocate to his city in July. We met through Facebook dating, and after a week of numerous FaceTime calls during the Christmas break, he came to visit me. We had great chemistry and apparent common interests, such as our faith, future aspirations, and beliefs about children. I shared with him that I had recently ended a long-term and very toxic relationship that had hurt me deeply a few months prior, but I assured him that I had moved on and was ready to start something new. I had begun counseling and felt optimistic about my life's direction. We discussed our fears about dating, and I expressed my concern that he might grow tired of making the long drive over time. He reassured me that he would not, and that I would not go more than 2 weeks without seeing him. He even suggested that if things progressed well, we could look for a place together, as our lease agreements were set to expire around the same time. He even took me to view an apartment with him. However, after the first month, I noticed shifts in his behavior. Our calls, which had initially occurred 5 times a week, dwindled to 3 and eventually to just once, which hurt me deeply. After spending a weekend together, he typically did not reach out for 3 to 4 days, and his calls were never on consecutive days. While I understood that maintaining 5 calls weekly could be a challenge, I found just 1 call per week to be excessive. He would text me often throughout the day, but I mentioned early on that I struggle to build intimacy through texts. After I communicated my feelings, he promised to call 3 to 4 times a week and encouraged me to call him as well. I was still dissatisfied because I personally need daily conversations, even if it is just for 30 minutes during my commute home, and I did not want him to feel obligated to call me. I wanted him to initiate contact willingly, as he had at the beginning. I observed that on the few occasions when he did something that bothered me, he appeared visibly uncomfortable and almost frightened. I attempted to remain calm to avoid coming off as confrontational, but my frustration was building. 1 week before Valentine's Day, I sensed him withdrawing and told him he could cancel the Airbnb reservation he had made if he wished. I did not want him to feel trapped in the situation if he was not genuinely interested. He surprised me with flowers and assured me that he still had feelings for me and had merely been preoccupied with work. When I inquired if he had started seeing someone else, he said no, so I opted to continue the relationship. In the following weeks, he called every other day as promised, but he seemed distant on the phone and weary of staying up late to talk. He expressed several minor concerns that led me to believe he might not be committed for the long haul. He had mentioned early in our relationship that he was a Christian, and although we had become intimate, he wanted to reserve sex for marriage. When he posed that question early on, I had likely indicated that it was not a priority for me. Around Valentine's Day, he stated that he intended to become abstinent upon his return. During our playful moments, he would say things like, "Get it while it's hot," which I recognized as a reference to sex, but I had a strong feeling that other things were going to change after the holiday. When Valentine's Day arrived, he did not text me to wish me a happy day. It hurt, and at 1 p.m., I sent him a message asking if he was really going to skip wishing me well. He responded that he was busy at work but could not wait to see me that evening. I felt very hurt and arrived at our Airbnb 2 hours late that night. I informed him of my delay, but it was still a deliberate choice. I was tired of feeling uncertain about his feelings for me. Once I arrived, I immediately felt guilty, but I did not apologize. While we were there, we had a wonderful time, and he was affectionate, which was lovely. On Friday, he claimed he would call but did not reach out until around 11 p.m. I felt upset because he finished work at 5, yet waited until much later that night to go to the gym, which coincided with the time we usually talked. I did not want him calling me when he was exhausted and ready to sleep. When we discussed it, he claimed I expected him to initiate calls while I never called him, which was true as I did not want to overwhelm him. If he was only comfortable with 3 calls a week, I did not want to force a 4th and risk annoying him. We spoke on Saturday, and he pointed out that our 3-month anniversary was approaching. I had previously informed him that after this period, I needed a decision regarding exclusivity, and he agreed that it was enough time to discern whether he wanted to pursue that. He explained that there is a difference between liking someone and being able to work as partners in a relationship. During our call, he posed a faith-related question that we had disagreed upon earlier. He then stated that he wanted to refrain from having sex until marriage. I agreed with the idea of abstaining from sexual relations and expressed that it complicated my feelings, and I thought it would be wise to wait. I also mentioned that I wanted to reduce our drinking together and focus more on getting to know one another. He agreed. He then prompted me to share ways in which I felt we aligned or did not. I stated that I would need time to think about it, and he offered his explanations. He indicated that he felt my vision board, which we had created together in our first month, focused more on partying and less on God, whereas his board reflected his spiritual priorities. I pulled out the vision board and saw that, apart from one image of a restaurant, the remainder revolved around healthy living. There were only 2 out of 16 images related to God. I felt confused. He remarked that it was more about just living. I started feeling offended. I dislike it when people act self-righteous and particularly despise hypocrisy. Yes, I do believe he is closer to God, but I consider myself a good person and I strive to grow. He reads the Bible daily. While I do not read it frequently due to its difficulty, but I attend church twice a month and pray regularly. He does not attend church in his own city. He was the one who initiated our physical relationship, and he frequently engaged in sexual touching. He had purchased bottles of alcohol for us and has gone out more than I have since we met. I used to work as a bottle girl, but I have completely transformed, and I detested the emotions this conversation invoked. He mentioned wanting to wait until marriage, despite the fact that I had communicated early on that I would not. I told him I had not fully considered that decision, and if I found the right partner, I would be willing to wait and would do so with him. Additionally, he brought up my desire for an open phone policy in our relationship, to which he disagreed. He preferred to be trusted. I explained that I wanted my partner to agree, at the start of our relationship, that if either of us felt uncomfortable, we would allow the other to check their phone. There would not be any hiding of devices. Having been cheated on before, I need complete transparency. I clarified that this wouldn't mean I would check his phone often or without permission. He mentioned that such an arrangement had caused significant issues with his ex-partner, which he wanted to avoid repeating. He expressed uncertainty as our 3-month mark neared and admitted that he often felt uneasy. I felt devastated when he conveyed this. I expressed my desire for a partner who is certain and voiced my concern that I didn't want to keep driving and investing so much effort if he felt unsure. He stated he did not wish to waste my time. We soon ended the conversation. I was emotionally shaken, and after reflecting on our discussion, I called him back to express my feelings. I felt as though he had been creating distance for some time, and when I offered him an exit, he chose not to take it but instead decided to keep me in limbo while continuing our physical relationship, allowing me to spend money and time while knowing where things were heading. I told him I had noticed the small changes he had made and the emotional distance, and instead of addressing it beforehand, he let Valentine's Day come and go while I was left questioning him 2 weeks earlier. He became angry at that point, insisting that this was never a scheme against me, and that he had not let a singular negative feeling dictate his actions. I told him I was simply hurt, and that I would let him get some sleep before ending the call. The next day, I sent him a message apologizing for the ways in which I might have sabotaged our relationship. He had not made me feel secure due to the inconsistency of our calls and a few comments he had made, but perhaps I was overanalyzing them. He had invested significant time and resources into us, and I had been confused. When we spoke, he stated that the conversation confirmed his feelings and that he had promised himself not to ignore certain red flags as he had done in previous relationships. I asked him to take time to reflect and call me the following day after considering his thoughts. I wanted to ensure that he did not make a decision based on anger from my outburst. Yesterday, he called to end the relationship. He indicated that distance played a role as well. With 5 months until my planned move, he acknowledged that we thrived together but not as well apart at times. I felt sadness but accepted his decision and wished him the best. I shared my feelings with friends, who pointed out that while I may have exacerbated the situation by being suspicious and not reaching out myself, it seemed like he was ready to end things. If the primary issue was that one partner desires more closeness, that would be indicative of a solid foundation. I am uncertain if he has met someone new in his city, or if he simply grew tired of driving and spending so much money. He had mentioned needing to save significantly in the past month and planned to move back in with his family in July to cut costs. It feels as though he used any minor issue as an excuse to end the relationship because he was exhausted from my requests for more connection and could not handle my strong emotions or confrontations. I recognize that his actions do not significantly impact my life, and I will move on. I lead a fulfilling life with a full-time job, am an online student, enjoy various hobbies, and have wonderful friends. I am still quite confused about what went wrong, and would appreciate your thoughts on what you believe truly happened. Story 3. I was manipulated into falsely accusing my online friend of being a groomer when I was 16. Hello. Before we begin, I am now 18 years old. This started back in 2022 and 2023. At that time, my friend was 18. He was 2 years and 4 months older than I. I understand that my actions were wrong, and I regret them to this day. I also recognize that this post reflects behavior typical of someone overly online, so please be advised. This is a trivial matter, because it truly was and still is. It merely described my approach during high school, especially given that the pandemic was concluding. We met in an online massively multiplayer online role-playing game, MMORPG, when I was 15 or 16, and he was 18. He was a senior in high school and had just celebrated his 18th birthday. I turned 16 a few weeks after we first encountered each other. We'll refer to him as Mac. Mac hosted a Dungeons & Dragons-style role-playing session in the game. It was indeed one of the better ones, as he developed the campaign out of resentment toward other popular players who were predatory toward younger members. According to him, there was a group of 21-year-olds who would prey on or flirt with younger users and harass them for unknowingly breaking the rules. Therefore, Mac initiated his own role play that condemned such behavior, and he was quite adept at identifying users who misbehaved. I recall that my initial interaction with Mac occurred when our characters engaged in combat, and we mutually agreed that Mac's character would lose. He told me he did not mind this, as he wanted players to enjoy the drama and experience victories from time to time. I asked Mac if he was comfortable with gore, as I was an edgy teenager who enjoyed creating fight scenarios for the sake of drama. He seemed somewhat taken aback by this, and replied that it was acceptable as long as it remained non-graphic. He even inquired about what I intended to do. I mentioned that I wanted my character to break the other character's fingers, and he said that was fine, provided it was part of the combat and nothing inappropriate. After it took place, he expressed that he found it strange and explained why he felt it was not appropriate. Mac told me that he knew that torture was often normalized within the game. I realize how unusual this sounds, and it is indeed strange. Such behavior has become completely accepted there and continues to be to this day. The moderators do nothing about it. But he recognized how peculiar it was and how the group of 21-year-olds had led him to think it was acceptable when he himself was 16 or 17, which was quite bizarre. They had even accused him of being predatory for making it weird by telling them it was gross. He also explained that predators frequently fetishize these types of interactions, which is why he was so troubled. I understood and acknowledged that I should steer clear of those kinds of role plays. He also reassured me that if I ever faced issues or felt uncomfortable, I was entirely justified in informing him, and he would try to assist. He stated, and I believe this is excellent advice for anyone, that blocking or reporting individuals is perfectly acceptable if it means prioritizing my own comfort. We continued to be good friends and began sharing our stories and characters together after I joined the Discord server. Eventually, I became a moderator because I noticed that Mac was struggling to manage the server. It was his very first one and was often plagued by misconfigured roles and bots, and I offered to help. I took charge when needed, and Mac often worried about burdening me and the other moderators with too much work, so he would try to handle tasks himself. When he noticed that I was feeling overwhelmed, he even temporarily revoked my role and insisted that I take a break. I eventually encountered issues with another role-playing group. The host was extremely transphobic and even racist. I informed Mac about this, and he was appalled. Mac personally confronted the individual, they admitted to it, and he subsequently banned them from our role plays. He also reported them, leading to their suspension, which we both found amusing. Mac had access to their Discord server because he had joined it in the past without knowing their behavior and had forgotten to leave. He often archived servers in case a predator was called out and proof was needed, which unfortunately happens often, so he witnessed their reaction. He showed me, and I felt reassured knowing they faced the consequences of their actions before he left their server. Mac's roleplay eventually grew very popular, reaching nearly 300 members. He encountered issues from time to time, such as banning users who engaged inappropriately with minors and dealing with situations where malicious individuals were falsely accusing others. Eventually, one of those malicious users became my friend, whom we will refer to as Rose. It is essential to note that Rose hadn't done anything wrong until after I met them. I often discussed Mac with this person, and they expressed their dislike for him. They claimed he was too lenient, despite Mac being widely known in the community as quite strict. They eventually began to suggest that Mac was grooming me, and I, regrettably, began to believe them. What led Rose to think that Mac was grooming me? Rose pointed out the following: our age difference in our friendship was significant. However, it is worth noting that Rose was also 2 years older than I am. Do you recall that initial encounter with Mac I previously mentioned? Rose asserted that it constituted grooming. Considering what Mac had warned me about, I believed this claim. Mac permitted combat in his role play. Rose stated that while violence was acceptable, other users sometimes went too far. It is crucial to emphasize that this referred to other users, not Mac himself. Moreover, this was one isolated incident. Mac's moderators were aged 15, 16, and 17. He had a rule stipulating that individuals must be at least 15 to serve as moderators, as he did not want younger middle schoolers on his staff team. However, according to Rose, this was still deemed too young and dangerous, despite the fact that Mac was still a peer as a high school student himself. The tavern in his roleplay was excessive. Although taverns are a fundamental aspect of Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, Mac ensured it was age-appropriate. In other words, alcohol was acceptable, but it should not be used for sexual purposes, nor should players brag about drinking in real life or serve alcohol to minor characters. The depiction of a guillotine was too much. It was only used when someone requested or wanted to dramatically eliminate their character. Additionally, making this scenario gory was quite challenging, as it came across as silly due to the game's limitations. As of today, Mac has expressed regret about including this element, but personally, I see no issues with it. Dungeons & Dragons often involves monster slaying and warfare, and children's books feature far worse elements, for example, warrior cats. Consequently, we created a call-out document. We sent it to Mac, other role plays, and practically anyone we could warn. Rose spoke on my behalf since I was reluctant to confront anyone and relayed information to me. Mac was devastated. Apparently, he had obsessive-compulsive disorder, which he had mentioned on a few occasions, but I had never grasped its true extent. Mac broke down, eventually questioning if he might indeed be a groomer, apologized, and expressed his intention to withdraw from the community to protect other users. The document gained sufficient traction for a popular user and YouTuber, whom we will refer to as Ahole, to become involved. Ahole frequently dealt with such situations and assisted efforts to alert others about problematic users. They had been involved in Mac's roleplay often, which explained their considerable interest in the matter. Ahole approached me, Rose, and Mac individually in separate conversations to gather information. As I shared my perspective with Ahole, I began to realize just how exaggerated the situation had become. Rose continued to maintain her stance, asserting that while Mac might not be classified as a groomer, he was nevertheless a predator. After Ahole spoke to everyone, a week later, a new document was released, created solely by Ahole, containing all the information and evidence that emerged. Ahole essentially claimed that while Mac had made mistakes, he was certainly not a predator, but rather one of the safer figures in the community. The document spanned around 70 pages and included screenshots illustrating everyone's perspectives, as well as evidence of Mac informing his 300 community members about predatory behaviors to monitor or personal instances where he addressed or banned predatory users. Rose quickly conceded after seeing the document. She admitted that she harbored a personal bias against Mac. The community concluded that Mac was neither a predator nor a groomer, leading to Rose facing immediate backlash. Ahole reassured me that teenagers often make foolish mistakes and that I was not a bad person. Mac also reached out to me, still apologizing even though I had not asked for any apologies, while informing me that he forgave me. However, he did not wish to remain involved for long. Mac eventually ended his role play, and Ahole offered to take over. Ahole revitalized the role play, but Mac completely dissociated from the community. From what I understand, he only becomes active when someone requires assistance or advice regarding situations or drama. He mentioned that he plans to pursue a career in psychology to become a victim advocate and help others. In conclusion, it has been 2 years and yet I feel terrible. Mac has forgiven everyone, even Rose, but the guilt weighs heavily. That is all I had to confess. I apologize for the lengthy post. It is a lot, yet it haunts me every day. I recognize how dreadful it is to so blatantly label someone in such a manner. Such actions can have serious consequences. I am just grateful that everyone is on good terms now. In summary, I accused my friend of being a groomer due to the influence of an older individual who had a personal vendetta against him, convincing me of this. Another person later emerged with evidence that disproved the claims, clearing up the situation. Story 4. HOA receives a check for all fines. Brief history. In the fall of 2005, my partner and I purchased our first home together. We were thrilled. Children on the way. The house was charming and located in a newly developed neighborhood where the homeowners association had just been established. Our residence was situated at the end of a dead-end street, quiet and devoid of traffic. The neighbors were pleasant. Approximately 3 years later, the United States economy collapsed dramatically. More than half of the homes within our neighborhood faced foreclosure or were in the midst of the process. My family and I stopped making mortgage payments. We relocated, and a family friend along with his family moved into our former home after losing theirs. He pays me a reduced rent, which allows me to cover the mortgage while maintaining the property. The homeowners association is struggling to manage the communal areas and keep them tidy due to a shortage of funds. Broken down vehicles and dying landscapes are prevalent. One house was reduced to ashes. A few months after my friend moved in, red fire lane paint was applied to the curbs of all the dead-end streets in the neighborhood. I was infuriated because it restricted street parking in front of my house. Whenever I needed to visit to make repairs, or if my tenant had visitors, we had to park in front of a neighbor's property or in the community roads and walk back. I contacted the local fire department to inquire why so many fire lanes were needed, given that there were no hydrants nearby. They informed me that they had not requested the additional fire lanes nor the curb painting. It turns out anyone can paint a curb red. It is the presence of signs or hydrants that establishes it as a legal fire lane. The paint merely serves to help interpret the signage. I checked, and sure enough, there were no signs. I learned that this was a scheme devised by the Homeowners Association to generate additional revenue. By labeling painted curbs as a safety zone, they could fine homeowners for violating the safety zone regulations. It is also ironic that the president of the Homeowners Association resides at the terminus of one of the cul-de-sacs, and now the neighbors can no longer park in front of her house without facing safety zone fines. One evening, just after dusk, while wearing a high-visibility vest, safety glasses, and work boots, I painted over the red curb with plain gray paint, specifically designed for concrete with excellent coverage. I covered the entire dead-end street. 3 weeks later, it was red again. 2 days later, gray. 5 weeks, red, then gray with a silicone top sealant, then red, which peeled off almost immediately. Then red once more, which flaked. Eventually, a sign appeared stating, "Safety zone no parking." Due to a lack of payment, the property is now under foreclosure notification, and I am collaborating with an agency to assist with the necessary paperwork so we can proceed with a short sale. In this context, short selling signifies that although we originally committed to paying the bank $350,000 plus interest for the house, they would absolve any outstanding amount as long as we handed over the property in good condition, e.g., without flushing concrete down the toilets or puncturing the water pipes. This situation puts us in a difficult position, but it is preferable to owing $350,000 on a property valued at only $165,000 that will soon be legally taken from us. Thank you, Reagan. I am still waiting for that trickle-down effect. During a short sale, you are required to inform any potential parties that might have liens on the property, including the Homeowners Association. I am current on my dues and have no outstanding violations, so I believed I would be fine. However, the Homeowners Association suddenly presented a lengthy list of violations that had not been addressed or rectified for 5 months, along with additional fines for the delay. They claimed to have notified me in November, but they cannot produce copies of these numerous violation notices. They only have the latest one from March that details all outstanding violations. Examples include black stains on the driveway, an uncoiled garden hose, an unapproved tree, a missing bush, absent foliage, and a dead tree. I notified them that the stains were tire marks from driving into the garage. They approved the unapproved tree. The missing bushes were authorized for removal. Here's a copy of the plan and your approvals with your signature on it. It is not my fault that you do not remember what you authorized. Regarding the dead tree, many trees lose their leaves in the fall, around November. They might appear dead if you are fabricating violations in February, but they are merely dormant, waiting for spring. Even if it were dead, you cannot replace a tree in November, December, January, or February. No nurseries sell saplings this late in the season, unless you are looking for a Christmas tree. How could one reasonably be expected to replace a dead tree during the off-season? The Homeowners Association takes time to respond, and the short sale is under a deadline. If I do not submit all legal documents, payments for liens, and related paperwork to the escrow officer by a specified date, my short sale will collapse, and I will owe $350,000 in interest on a $165,000 house that is about to be foreclosed. The cumulative fines and fees from the Homeowners Association amount to $1,955, just shy of where felony fraud begins. I am livid. This Homeowners Association is going to take advantage of me one last time, and I will have to bear the cost of this ordeal. I spoke with the escrow officer to determine what she required. Only the payment for the Homeowners Association lien and escrow would close the next day. She has encountered many similar cases with fines of this nature stalling short sales, none exceeding $2,000. I inquired what form of payment would meet her needs as an escrow officer. Money order, cash, or check. A check would surely be the most convenient for you, don't you think? If I write a check to the Homeowners Association for $1,955 and hand it to you, that will satisfy escrow. Yes, you will mail the check to the Homeowners Association after the documents are recorded. Yes, I will provide a check in 25 minutes. The next day, I am on the phone with the escrow officer, seated in my car in a parking lot at 9:01 a.m. Did the documents get recorded? Did the short sale succeed? Yes, I will send finalized documents and any other necessary items before the close of business today. Thank you. I hang up and enter my bank's local branch to inform the teller that I need to place a stop payment on a check. Edit. My apologies. I neglected to include the fallout, Rule 7. Here it is. The Homeowners Association never attempted to collect or contact us again.